Just as we begin the second section, we've ordered a couple of books for the church library that are recommended for the subject of apologetics. This is called, it's a quick source guide to Christian apologetics. It's an introductory book. And also, this book by Greg Kokel called Tactics, a game plan for discussing your Christian convictions. This is going to form the basis of my talks for the next couple of days. So this is also going to be available in the library. I'm not sure how the cataloging and all that happens, but you can look forward to borrowing those as you like. One of the aims of our course in apologetics is to start to build a foundation for you of knowledge into the reason that we can have confidence for the convictions that we share as Christians. But we also want to give you some tools so that when you're interacting with people, you have tools in your toolkit to help you navigate those times when you are being challenged by questions or you are being confronted with claims or just circumstances that are kind of wanting to throw you off your sense of confidence and so on. And so we want to give you some tools on how best to respond in situations like that. Giving you just information and facts, it's a lifetime thing. And I mean, we could be here every night for the next 50 years, and there's still learning to be done. And as circumstances in the world changes, we are challenged afresh as Christians to respond in ways that we never would have imagined having to respond even 20 years ago. And I'm not going to name some issues that are very, very open in our society today that 20 years ago it wouldn't have even been thought sensible or sane, but here we are. So what I want to do this stretch is to start to introduce how to take the information that you do have using some tactical skills to put your Christian witness and sharing into play. And if you want to follow up this resource, you go to str.org. This is the website for Stand to Reason. And it's just a lot of wonderful, extensive information there with videos and things you can order and articles and all the like that you would, I believe, find to be very, very helpful. Let's remember where we started a couple of weeks ago in what the Bible has to say about apologetics. This is where we get our term apologetics from. In 1 Peter chapter 3, verse 15, it says, "Always being prepared to make a defense to anyone who asks you for a reason for the hope that is in you." And this is content. "Yet, do it with gentleness and respect." That is tact. And we also find in reading the extended portion of the scripture that it comes out of Christian character. So if you study the passage, you'll see, but be sure that you are living a life such that even when they point a finger of accusation at you, when it comes down to the end of the day, their accusations don't stick. So there's knowledge, and there's tactics, and there's Christian character that are all part of being effective as witnesses for Jesus. So tonight I want to talk a bit about the tactical game plan and situational awareness. So if you're going to put tactics into play, you kind of need to know what tactics are appropriate given the situation you're in. So I'll unpack that a bit for you. Let's begin with this question. What are some questions that you have faced or asked that have maybe stumped you? You haven't known quite how to reply. Or what assertions that have come your way that have been difficult to deal with? And I'll just ask you to provide a few examples. So anybody have a question or an assertion that you hear commonly challenging us as Christians?
What is the point of us praying for things when we already know that you already have your answer?
The question that has been raised is, what is the point of prayer? Yeah, and what's the point of praying if God is sovereign and does what he wants to do anyway? Then what difference does prayer make in essence? Is that the kind of thing you mean? Okay, so what difference does prayer make if God does what he wants to do? Good.
Well, the reason that I've asked this question many times is that it often comes during a period where there's very imminent and deep disappointment.
Yep.
And then I know it's very possible that that's going to happen, but we pray that, we pray it will be done, but we're supposed to pray. But what's the point if we already know God's already got it planned, and I know we're supposed to trust, and we do, and I do. I just want to know, but I don't really trust.
if I could put the question crassly, why pray if it doesn't make a difference?
Exactly.
Yeah, okay. And that question is the kind of question that, and as we'll unpack, can come at us from a Christian who just tenderly is in love with Jesus, or a skeptic who just thinks we're a bunch of idiots. So the same question can come with different intent, right? So why pray if it doesn't make a difference? Is that a fair summary? Okay. Now, I'm not going to answer that question tonight, because that will take a whole lot more. But we'll start to unpack, okay? Another challenge or question?
The one we hear all the time is, if God is a God of love, why is there so much horrible things happening in the world?
Yep. So the question is, if God is a God of love, why do so many bad things happen? And this, of course, is probably the big challenge for any of us, and has been for anybody who believes in a God. Wrestling with the whole issue of we are supposed to worship and love and adore this God who we believe is good and holy and just, but can anybody think of an assertion, a statement, a positive statement that people will make to challenges? I'll offer one then. Science has disproven God. Have you heard something along those lines before? So this is just one example, and you can just add to your list of your own questions and assertions. Science has disproven God, and I'll just use those as kind of examples as we're marching along here a bit, and unpack it, and you can add your own application as we go. All right. So let's consider the various situations we might be in when facing questions and assertions, and how best not to lose our footing. Situational awareness, whoops, that's the book. Sorry, I haven't advanced the slides. There's the book resources, there's the verse, there's the questions, there we go. Situational awareness is a key and the art of survival. So what I'd like to do is consider some of the various situations we might be in and how best not to lose our footing when we're trying to represent Christ well. So there are lots of different situations in which you can face challenges and questions, a wide variety of them. And understanding the situation that we're in when we're facing those things will help to give us insight as to how best to respond. Okay? So the question, what difference does prayer make? Can come at us from lots of different situations, lots of different kinds of people and different circumstances, and evaluating, being aware of where we're at, what's going on at the time, will help us to work out how best to proceed in response to the challenge. For example, if you're at a coffee shop and you're sitting down with a good friend over a cup of coffee, and she brings up a question or makes an assertion, what do you make of that kind of situation when you're with somebody on those terms? What's going through your mind? What's going through your emotions and stuff while you're dealing with these things? Possibly defensive because your relationship's at risk, maybe? Perhaps?
Well, Jesus is my friend, so sometimes I want to just need to defend
Okay.
anybody that.
Okay, good. So it's been observed that when somebody challenges us in our faith, because Jesus is our friend and we love him and we want to represent him well, our tendency might be to jump back with defense, wanting to defend right away because we're defensive in that sense. I would propose, though, what I'm trying to get across in this particular situation, because there's going to be some even tougher, more confrontational positions that I'll bring up. But when you're sitting down over a coffee with a friend, you already have an established relationship, right? You kind of understand each other a little bit, you know a little bit of their story, you're committed to each other, at least sharing a cup of coffee. And by the way, it's amazing if you're sitting down trying to settle an issue with another person who you've had a bit of a testy relationship of late. If you sit down with a cup of joe and you're sitting at a table or in a comfortable chair and having conversation, there's something about that posture that just kind of eases the scene. You're kind of in a scene of hospitality, and that makes the confrontation or that difficult discussion a little more comfortable. And sometimes if the pastor invites you out for coffee, no, I'm joking. Maybe Andrew's trying to deal with something. No, not necessarily. Maybe just likes coffee. But coffee over a friend is a little bit of a different situation from this one, a Bible study group. So you're in a Bible study group, and everybody's got their Bible open, and most of them will already be believers. They know something about the Bible, and they're eager to learn from the Bible. And then an issue comes up. And in that kind of scenario, what you might be looking to do to answer the question is to go to portions of Scripture that maybe shed light on the particular question that's being raised, right? So a Bible study group is a different kind of scenario where when you're with your girlfriend at the coffee shop and she raises a question with you, you might not break out the Bible and give them the Bible to open up and start doing theme studies, or that sort of thing. But in a Bible study group, it's the natural place. And so often in a Bible study group, when you're discussing these difficult questions, issues of theology, Christianese language, all that sort of stuff is quite appropriate. And you'll dive into that because that's really what the people are there for. How about you're a mom and dad, and Junior comes home from school and offloads something on you? Now what? Now, if you're a parent, and you have a reasonably trusting relationship with your daughter or son, there's probably going to be those times when they'll come and they'll just open up with you about something at school, something a teacher said, something a friend said, or with a question that they might have. And then you have opportunity to respond. Now, clearly, your opportunity with your child is a very different sort of scenario than when you're sitting down with coffee at a coffee shop or other scenarios. And the advantage to being a parent is you have a long-term opportunity to deal with questions. And you can look at it as a gradual unfolding of instruction. And some issues are pretty tough for a 5-year-old to grasp. And you have the opportunity as a parent to give enough information to satisfy at that point, with the expectation that you will have opportunity to take it deeper as time progresses. Sometimes as parents, too, it's good to have a timeout, and you're kind of shocked, and you don't know how to respond. And you might want to say, wow, that's a tough question. I'm going to have to think about that for a while. Or something along those lines. Or, I'm in the middle of making supper. Can we talk about it afterwards? Or we'll call the pastor and ask him. So you see how tactically it's different. You run into a friend on the street. How are you doing? Oh, I'm doing okay. My mom just died. I don't understand what God's up to. You only have a certain amount of time. You're out there in the open, the public. You're just passing by. You might not want to sit down and have an in-depth Bible study at this point in discussion of the theological understanding of the reason for evil. Maybe you give them a hug. You say, can I pray for you? Sometimes people need that more than an answer. You're visiting a person in the hospital, and they're raising questions. Or how about a formal debate, where the give and take and arguing is expected? Use all kinds of rhetorical devices and raised voices and dramatic things to make your point. And you're not trying to convince the person on the stage that you're arguing with, you're trying to convince the audience that's listening in. Again, it's very different, isn't it, in that situation? A classroom, professor makes a statement. Religion is at the root of every bad thing that happens in human history. And it goes on. You might put up your question. You want to ask a question. We'll talk about this next week. The man with the microphone wins, so you need to play it very carefully if you're in a lecture hall and you're confronting your professor on it. Or how about when you're on texting or chatting or on X or Facebook or some group chat? Social media is ugly when it comes to debate. The name calling and invective that takes place. Moreover, people can lure you into making a statement and use that to destroy your life. People have lost their jobs and businesses for something that might have been posted thoughtlessly or taken totally out of context. I just warn you about how you interact online. And once you've posted something, it doesn't go away. So, another important situation. Who am I dealing with? Well, we've already touched on some of this. As we think of this, Jesus spoke with people who came to him with questions and challenges and statements that were intended to trap him. And he responded differently with different people. I think there's reasonable justification in believing the story of the woman caught in adultery is authentic. Just my guess. Well, more than a guess, but I'll just say it's my guess for now. Jesus deals with that woman quite tenderly. Where are your accusers? A young man comes to him who is pretty well off, respected in his synagogue, and he says, Master, what must I do to inherit eternal life? He goes, well, you know the laws, commandments. Love the Lord thy God, and da-da-da-da-da-da. And so I've done all those. So, okay, one thing you lack, go sell everything you've got, give it to the poor, and come follow me. And the man went away sad. And we're told that Jesus looked at the man departing and loved him. Or you have other people who come and try to challenge Jesus and trap him. He says, you're a bunch of snakes. See, Jesus even uses different tactics depending on the people who are coming his way. So, for example, the person who's challenging us might actually be a curious, serious seeker. Somebody wanting to get answers, to go deeper. And so when they're asking questions, and sometimes they can be very annoying people to have in a Bible study group because they're always raising new questions, don't turn them away or chase them away. They might be just really eager to learn and discover. And how we respond to somebody who's just eager to dig deep and so on is going to take one form. That this person, where you might deal with this person differently, a friend. You have a relationship, you're sharing life together, and you've got a relationship that has a story behind it. You've shared certain aspects of a common journey. And you can deal with questions with such a person at a different level. You can tie it in personally to shared experiences and that sort of thing that can be very useful in sharing our faith. Then there's people who just love a good argument. They're ready for any kind of an argument. I've known people who are contrarian, who just want to argue against it because they love a good blow. And so that's what they'll do. I've heard rumors, I don't know if it's true or not, maybe you can confirm it or not, but I've heard rumors that there are sometimes people in churches who will vote against any motion if it's at risk of being a unanimous vote. Just on the principle, you can't have a motion that's passed with a unanimous vote. They're contrarians, they just want to fight because they like a good fight. Now I suspect that with such an individual, you can take one of two approaches. You'll fight back. I mean, if they're willing to give it to you, you can give it back, and they're okay with that. Or you can take the advice of the Proverbs and say, don't answer a fool with that kind of language and just let it go. It's not worth it. Anyway, you can evaluate that. What about the accuser? There are people who, when they come after Christians, they just want to tear you, if not you, they want to tear down the Christian faith. And they're armed to the teeth with all kinds of weapons that they can use to rip you down. And they're not interested in hearing an answer to their challenge or their question, because no sooner have you started to answer them, they're unloading another question. And this is a situation that you might run across at times. There are people also who ask questions who are really kind of afraid of asking the question, who are a little timid and afraid of offending or looking foolish or whatever it might be. There are people who are really nervous about asking Bible teachers and pastors and stuff like that, the tough questions, because they don't want to hurt the pastor's feelings or something. Or they don't want to be diminished in the eyes of the pastor or the teacher. And these are people that one would need to deal with very differently than the pugilist. There's people in pain, which I've alluded to already. There's people who are doubting on their way out of the Christian faith because of some situation that's going on in their life. And their questions are raising, and they're kind of warning flags. Their issue might not even be the question they're asking. It just might be a signal that they're looking for justification to walk out the door. There's obstinate people. They don't want an answer. They don't care what the facts are. I've got my mind made up. Don't confuse me with the facts. And there are people just like that you might encounter. And then there are people who come and they are really with it. They have great questions. They know their stuff. They've got a huge argument, and it's bigger than you can handle right now. And, there's a lot of very smart, decent people out there with great questions that will be bigger than the answers that we have. So what do you do in situations like that? Here's the last thing I'd point out, and I've alluded to it already. Watch out for the person who's coming just to lure you in. They're baiting you, just wanting you to react. And don't bite. You don't have to react to every little thing that comes your way. Be careful of that. So, considerations. How much time do we have? Somebody asks you a question, offers a challenging thing. How much time do we have right now to take time to sit down and talk about this more fully? How much time do we have in terms of the days, months, even years ahead? Because there are some opportunities that are just a momentary thing, or it's a person you've happened across, you don't know them, you've met them in the grocery line. There are other people that you're sharing life with, maybe a husband, a wife, a parent, a child. It's there. Who's listening in? This is an important consideration. When we're having dialogue with an individual who's offering challenges and questions and so on, it's not only that person that you're trying to deal with, but be sensitive to the fact that there are other ears open. And the way that you deal with that question is that there's other people who are going to be curious to watch and hear what you have to say. And you've probably been in a group situation where somebody will say, are there any questions? And time goes by, and finally some timid person, like the person we saw here, or in the pictures earlier, put up their hands and ask a question, and everybody's relieved because they're all asking the same thing. And so that's a thing to remember. Third point is, what are my aims? In this interaction, what am I wanting to accomplish? Talk about that a little more fully. Things to remember, you don't have to win the argument. Okay? Every encounter, every confrontation, every question is not a war. So if you are tending towards being one of those pugilists who just loves a good argument, maybe it'd be worth remembering that any kind of confrontation or thing like this, you don't really have to win. This is not an opportunity for a win. This is an opportunity for relationship so that you can share the reason for your hope, right? Which is a different thing. You don't have to answer every question or address every error. When I was much younger in university, I was a much younger Christian than I am now, obviously. But I was keenly concerned that the Bible should be interpreted accurately. And so I'd go to a Bible study group at university, McMaster University, and our men's dorm, we had a big worship service gathering on Sunday evenings down in the basement. Probably 100 or so people had come there. It was great. And we'd have Bible study through the week. And wouldn't you know it, Steve, who's really concerned about accuracy of the truth, we'd be having our Bibles open and somebody would express their opinion, and I'd dive right in to correct the opinion. Because the truth matters, right? And then a friend of mine, Nathan Charles, from Trinidad, great big tall guy. He ended up being a professor of psychology at Duke University. Nathan Charles takes me aside one day, and he says, "Brethren," that's the way he would talk to me, "Brethren, do you know what's happening when you speak the way you do in the group?" And he needed to point out to me that in my mind, even though in my mind, when I spoke and retorted to a point of view that was, I thought, wrong, in my mind, I was only going after the idea. The person who had expressed the idea was sharing from their heart. And so even though I wasn't taking it personal, because I would love to get into those kind of battles, my style in interacting with disagreements and correcting people was actually hurting the aim of bringing someone along. So you don't have to answer every question or address every error. There are times to address the question, confront the error, but not always, and maybe not all the time, maybe not usually. I don't know about that. I'd have to think about that. Thoughtful silence is very powerful too. Sometimes you can be engaged in an interaction that's getting a little warm and heated and interesting, and sometimes keeping your mouth shut can be very useful and powerful. Let the other person talk. Because sometimes when a person's going on down a crazy train of thought and they just talk, they soon realize that the trail they're going down is really kind of dumb. And you haven't said a thing. You've just listened. Says, "Oh, that's interesting." That kind of thing, really. So sometimes thoughtful silence is powerful. Or as a parent with a child, the child comes and just blurts something out at you. And you just keep your mouth shut, you stay calm. And you just look them in the eye. It's amazing what conscience or the Holy Spirit or nature of the relationship can do. For silence, no words, to be a very powerful persuader. Strategic retreat is not failure. You will encounter issues and situations where you will have no answer. You won't know. You won't have the information. So you're taking comparative religion university, and the professor makes the claim that it's been very common in the last little while, that all of the stories about Jesus' resurrection are nothing but a retelling of resurrection myths of other gods, like Mithras and the like, and they'll just throw that out there. And you don't have a clue who Mithras is. And the professor or somebody is making this bold statement, and they're the ones with a PhD, and they're the ones who have studied a lot of this stuff, and their knowledge is way beyond what your knowledge is. Strategic retreat to go and investigate for yourself and think it through and so on, so that you don't just end up saying something dumb, can be very, very useful. And by the way, in warfare, strategic retreat is a positive tactic for winning a war. And so I just want to say, if you're tending towards being a pugilist and wanting to stir it up all the time, something happens, you're in an engagement that's getting a little bit edgy and uncomfortable, or you don't have the answers, so that's very interesting. I need to think about it. Can we talk about it some other time? Or can we talk about next time we get together for coffee? Or whatever your response might be. 5, listen carefully before formulating an answer. If you're in a give and take of a debate and arguing situation, I have found myself in a situation where I am eager to give my answer before the other person has finished their paragraph, their sentence. And I've stopped listening. All I'm thinking about is looking for the time to just butt in and say my thing. And it's really important that if we're going to be engaging a person meaningfully with gentleness and respect, that we really understand what their point of view is. And in so doing, listening carefully, intentionally deciding I don't have to say anything right now, can be a very useful thing to do. 6, this is similar. Don't interrupt. Let the other person talk. It's okay not to have an answer and to admit it. In fact, some people will probably feel really rather relieved if in raising a question to you about God or whatever issue it might be, that to just say, that's tough, I wrestle with that too. I don't have an answer for you right now. And that's okay. Life is full of questions that we don't all have answers for. If we had all the answers for all the questions that were out there, we probably wouldn't need God, would we? We'd probably be God. Fortunately, we're not. And it's also okay to be wrong and adjust your opinions. So if someone has pointed out a flaw in your argument, actually it can be really useful in having a respectful relationship with an individual to say, I hadn't thought about that. I think I'm going to have to rethink what I've been saying. That's a respectful response to someone. And by your being open to be admitting to not knowing everything and changing your mind, being corrected, perhaps the other person that'll rub off on them too, we don't know. And as Kieran pointed out, be content to putting a stone in their shoe. This is a term that Greg Kokel talks about. He says, sometimes Christians, when they're engaging a non-Christian and trying to share the gospel, they're hitting the ball, trying to get the ball to the fences. They want a home run every time they're connecting. He says, sometimes you just need to be content to get on first base because you have another chance. Or some other batter will come along later on. He likens it to putting a stone in the shoe. There are people who are fundamentally comfortable with their wrong beliefs and assumptions about Jesus and about the Christian faith. And they're okay with it. And if you can put a little something that's just going to nag them in the sole of their feet, to keep them on edge, just to make them think, this way I've been thinking, this approach that I've been taking, it's just not measuring up somehow. That in itself is a positive thing. So put a stone in their shoe. And it's never a bad thing to get information. So, brings us to the Columbo tactic. Columbo, Lieutenant Columbo, is a detective from 1970s, I think, television series. Is that right? How many people remember Detective Columbo? Lieutenant Columbo, good. So, this is the first tactic that is really useful for our tool belt. And Greg Kokel calls it the Columbo tactic. So, you've seen the show. What do you remember about Lieutenant Columbo? Yeah. One more question. He's always asking questions, and he just drives the people nuts with his questions. What else do you remember about him? Yeah, feigned stupidity. He's rumply, he sort of seems forgetful. He's always saying, "Can I borrow your pencil? I forgot my pencil." And one more, he's walking out the room, and then he'll turn around and come back in. And he's giving the impression that he's not a very formidable opponent to the suspect. Anything else you remember about him?
He gets nerves, even though he acts like a fool, he's still making people uncomfortable.
He's using the question, he strikes a nerve and he gets people uncomfortable, and often it's because of the nature of his questioning that he's provoking things, he's opening up issues. So Lieutenant Columbo is underestimated. He doesn't reveal what he knows. He doesn't offload everything, all the goodies. He puts other people in the role of the expert. So quite often he'll invite the suspect to come with him to a crime scene to investigate it, and he'll ask the suspect to explain, "I can't figure out how this could have happened. How could this have happened?" And he looks to the suspect to try to explain what he's observing at the crime scene. That is a very powerful tactic, by the way. When you are engaging a person in this kind of a give and take relationship, to let them do the talking, let them do the explaining, make them the experts. It can be a tactical advantage for you in moving the point along. And he asks lots and lots and lots of questions. So here's a summary of the Columbo tactic. The Columbo tactic says, if you don't know where to go with the discussion, or you hit a roadblock, ask a question. If you don't know where to go with the discussion or hit a roadblock, ask a question. The key to the Columbo tactic is you go on the offensive in a disarming way with carefully selected questions to productively advance the situation. First Columbo question, what do you mean by that? It's a great question. What do you mean by that? What difference does prayer make if God's just going to do what he wants to do anyway? What do you mean by that? Or, tell me more. It helps to clarify what's lying behind the question, right? Why pray if it doesn't make any difference? If God is love, why do so many bad things happen? What do you mean by that? Science has disproven God. What do you mean by that? You're now putting the onus back on the person who's challenging or questioning you to fill out a little bit more of their inquiry or the statement, right? And that can be really important. An alternate question is, that's an important or that's a great question. Tell me more. So somebody's asking you a question about the problem of suffering in the world. It can be very useful to know what the background is in their thinking. Are they themselves going through suffering right now? Or are they paying attention to something in the news? The way you will respond is going to vary depending on what the background is to their question. So the first Columbo question accomplishes 4 things. 1, it involves the other person in an interactive way. They make a statement to you, they ask you a question, and you now ask them a question, and you're putting the ball back in their court. And you're involving them. You're not preaching at them, not telling them, you're not lecturing them. There's some engagement going on. Second, it respects the person by showing genuine interest in their point of view. So instead of just reacting to your interpretation of what the words were that the person just spoke, you are now letting them fill it out a bit and explain it more fully, and perhaps even to give substance to the challenge that they're making, which is really good, because if there's substance to the challenge that they're making, you need to respect the fact that they've thought some of these things through very, very deeply. It helps to assure that you understand their actual point of view. I don't know if you've ever answered an argument question only to discover you were answering a question that wasn't being asked. I have. Maybe husbands and wives sometimes go through that when they have a little debate or discussion at home, and you react, and then you discover you misheard or misunderstood entirely what the thoughts or motives or ideas were that were being expressed. So this is a very useful tool in helping the relationship be respectful and gentle and moving the discussion forward. It forces the other person to think precisely about their point of view. There's a lot of people, when challenging your Christian faith, who just use throwaway lines. And it's like sloganeering. Science has disproven God. They haven't thought it through. They don't know what they mean by that, but they've heard it so often that they just say that. Or people ought to be able to love who they want to love. And they'll use that, and it's kind of a throwaway line, but then you haven't really broken it down. What do you mean by that? You know, there's a lot of love scenarios out there, and maybe not equally desirable. But people use that as a line, thinking that that will convince you to a point of view. And there's lots of times that things like that will happen. So it forces the person to think more precisely about their point of view. And if after their point of view is still unclear to you, ask a follow-up question. Or make a statement like this. Let me see if I understand you. This is what I think you are saying, and then you speak back to them what you think that they're trying to communicate to you. Now that is showing them respect too, isn't it? Showing them respect if you can actually say to them what they actually believe. Now, we get into the give and take and heat of an argument, and sometimes in the fisticuffs of a debate, we can throw back a line that mischaracterizes what the other person says. But if you want to have a respectful relationship with a person who's challenging you, it's useful to listen very carefully and then be very certain that you understand what their actual point of view is before you respond to that point of view. Because if you've got it all wrong, it's best to make that clear. So, let's review. Advantages to the Columbo tactic. 1, it engages the other person in conversation. This is give and take. It's not lecture, it's not yelling, it's give and take. Okay? It gives you time to gather information and consider the next step to get you out of a difficult situation. You might not have a clue what that person just said, or you might be totally at a sea in trying to figure out, what in the world do I say to this? But if you've got a question, you can ask, tell me more. How did you come to that conclusion? What do you mean by that? Puts it back on them, and they have to continue the conversation. You don't need to do any talking. You just have to do the listening. And it gives you time to think clearly and prayerfully about how do I now respond in this situation. It shifts the burden of proof. By asking them the question, they are the ones who has to come up with a substantial answer. You don't have to. So, science has disproven God. And they're waiting for you to prove that science has proven God. And you just ask a question back. Oh, tell me more. How'd you come to that conclusion? Now they've got to talk about how science disproves God. And you're off the hook. They get to do the talking. And that's really kind of a neat thing about this. And it keeps you in control. If you have a set of questions and responses that you can offer thoughtfully, respectfully, with intention to listen and to respond in a way that's appropriate for the person and the situation, it also keeps you kind of in control. It doesn't put you on the back foot. If a person just comes at you with assertion and you're trying to answer directly every assertion, every claim and question all the time, you're the one who's always on the defensive, having to come back. By asking questions, you're putting the direction of the flow of conversation and stuff in their direction. And it helps you keep some poise in all of that. It exposes weaknesses in the other person's point of view that can be used. So you let them talk. And often by their talking, it can expose inconsistencies or lack of information or wrong information that you can now use later on in the ongoing debate and discussion about these things. And it keeps the conversation going. Sometimes when we respond to a question, we can just shut people down by just having, science proves that God doesn't exist. Well, God invented science. That's kind of a shutting down kind of comment, instead of inviting an ongoing conversation. And that's what you want. You want to keep the relationship going so that over time, over whatever period of time that you happen to have at this moment, you can carry the conversation forward, putting a stone in the shoe, nudging people to Jesus. It helps assure that you understand what the issue actually is. Sometimes a person will ask you a question and their question isn't really the question. So, what do you think about governments providing safe injection sites downtown? When you respond at the level of your opinion about the propriety of having safe injection sites downtown. That's not the question. The question is that their nephew has gone downtown to the safe injection site and has ended up in a terrible condition of drug addiction or life-endangering circumstance. And that's really kind of what they're thinking about, not the theory of the effectiveness of safe injection sites. You follow what I'm trying to say? It can reveal blind spots or limitations to your own understanding. So by asking questions and getting in the give and take, we don't have it all figured out. There's things we have to learn and discover. And by allowing them to ask us the question and come back with answers to our inquiries, often and can point out lack in our own understanding or perhaps flaws in our own hard attitudes about circumstances. And that can't be a bad thing, can it? So practice the Columbo tactic. What difference does prayer make? And you might say, tell me, hey, Christian, what difference does prayer make? Why pray if it doesn't make a difference if God's just going to do what he wants to do? Okay. Well, and then you tell the story. If God is the God of love, why do so many bad things happen? Hey, Fred, if God's a God of love, why do so many bad things happen?
Well, maybe because bad things happen because you're not following the rules.
Fred's coming up with an answer. The point of here, or the exercise is the question. Now, your answer may well be very true, but at this point, we're just practicing the Columbo tactic. And the Columbo tactic would be, tell me more. Or, what do you mean by that? Or something along those lines, okay? Just to carry it through, to get a little bit more information. Science has disproven God. Joe, science has disproven God. Yeah, okay, yeah. What do you mean by that? How did that happen? And that invites a response now to talk out more fully what the question is. And your relationship hasn't been destroyed. A conversation can now continue. You're opening up the information that'll help you respond in a more appropriate way. And you put a stone in the shoe, perhaps. Because maybe they're not even expecting a Christian to take an interest in you. Because they're sure that Christians have got their minds made up and are really rather judgmental and harsh about all of this, after all. How did you come to that conclusion is another question. And remember that to this point, just simply by asking questions, you have not expressed an opinion. You have not answered a question. You have not responded to a challenge. You simply asked a question. What's to be afraid of? If you've got that kind of toolkit available. And that's Columbo Tactic Introduction tonight. Next week, Reliability of the New Testament and Columbo Part 2.